Welcome to Watching the Throne,
a lyrical and visual analysis of Kanye West.
My name's Chris Lambert.
And my name is Travis Bain, and I love these episodes. This combines my two favorite things, movies and Kanye West. I never thought I'd see the day.
It's been a treat doing these, Jeen-Yuhs Part 1, Part 2, Part 3 breakdowns, because rarely do we get to bring our movie chops to bear in the podcast space. I mean, I guess we still make movie comparisons, a lot of rant about movies, but
we do it constantly. And we're constantly using movies to tell the stories, to shine light on the stories Kanye West is telling. And we always talk about Patrick Swayze and Showgirls and RoboCop and Fight Club. I guess it is kind of a movie podcast now that I think about it.
In some ways, yes.
I mean, the ultimate goal, of course, is to get Kanye on the show to talk about movies. And if that happens, I mean, I might just retire. Like, I don't have enough money to retire, but I might just do it anyway.
Right. You walk into the grocery store and you're like, I interview Kanye about movies. Give me everything for free.
Give me this 2% milk.
At least
I didn't grab the whole milk. I didn't grab the good stuff.
Right. Just give me the 2%. Well, so we're finally at part 3. Part 3 of Jeen-Yuhs came out. The world is now caught up with us, in our special VIP press access.
Yeah, it's the first time in a long time I haven't felt like behind in step with the world,
Yeah, you're always not watching things.
Yeah, and just never in with what's hip, and I never know the lingo, and I don't watch, the Best Picture winner till 3 years later. This time, I'm ahead of the curve.
Yes, and we have some thoughts on part 3, which, I've been happy to see that a lot of people really enjoyed, at least in the Reddit thread that I saw, and a majority of the reactions to a tweet asking people about part 3. It seems like fans really enjoyed part 3 despite the difference in tone, right? From triumph to consequences, or at least kind of a more complications in the story.
Yeah, and it's a part. This part of the documentary has a completely different style and format and form of storytelling. It's also something a lot of critics noted and thought part 3 felt out of place and made the docuseries feel overly long. But really, I mean, Chris, what you and I do is we look, and not to tout us too much, but you and I originally came together because we wanted to reinvent film criticism, and we were just really bored with the way people wrote about movies, good or bad, here's my broad opinion, here's a score you could slap on it and blah, and let's just send it out the window. And you do that 15 times a week, and before you know it, you're boring. You're not letting any insight in the movies other than these little pedantic views you have of what movies should do. You and I have always kind of saw that and think isn't there something more you can be doing? Should be looking deeper. And so we started thinking about at least this is the way I've always thought about it is, when I watch a movie now, I'm really trying to think of what the artist is trying to convey and what ideas are being communicated. And ultimately, how you can get more from a movie. You can get a lot more from a movie. You don't have to like a movie, but if you at least understand what it's trying to do, whoa, the world opens up and it becomes a reflection of yourself, and movie becomes a much more cathartic experience. So in my mind, when I watch part 3, I'm completely baffled that all of these critics are saying it doesn't fit, when to me, it's the most logical way the movie can go, because parts 1 and 2, the aspect ratio is completely different. It has this home footage style that, and what do those images call? What does the mise en scène of that kind of scene tell you? It's memory, it's the past, it's old Kanye, it's an intimate experience. Whereas part 3 is much more removed. The image is clear. The aspect ratio it's more movie-like. Kanye is mythologized. He becomes this distance person that Coodie no longer has this inside view of. So part 3 becomes this detached, removed view of Kanye, and the guy we're seeing along the way, we saw parts 1 and 2. We know Kanye actually really isn't that much different than he used to be. all that's changed is the image of Kanye, like how we're seeing him, the overwhelmingness of fame, like how big the world becomes when you're someone like Kanye West. And thus the movie becomes this like, yeah, you don't have to agree with everything Kanye says and does, but like you can empathize with him. Like you can recognize he's a human. Like we have all of these parts of the documentary compiled together create that intimate view of Kanye, no matter how gigantic he becomes. It's an incredible achievement.
Yeah, and having that contrast, I saw somebody point out that they didn't like the distance. They were saying like, you know, we were so close, and then having the distance, it just, you know, why even bother kind of thing. And it's like that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
Right? Is that before the superstardom, before the fame, there's this access, there's this intimacy, and then the fame divides. Right. It separates. And it's not just that Ye lost his mom, right? That's something that's very impactful to anyone. But it's also the coupling of that with this fame that detaches you from people, that creates separation, especially as, you know, you have access to other people, you start to have more hollow relationships, or some of the relationships that you do have become by necessity, right? Like you have to become closer to your manager, to your agent, or to your publicist, or because you're traveling so much and doing things, you don't feel like you have the bandwidth to respond to your friends as much as you have the bandwidth to respond to the people that need answers from you immediately. And so you start to see that detachment come into effect as a consequence of the fame that he's achieved. And I think that's one of the most astounding things about part 3 is that in part 1 and 2, you have this degree of innocence to everything. Like, okay, we're going to get on, like we're going to do this tremendous thing, like we're going to make it work. And it's just like Ye's discography, where you see him striving on College Dropout and Late Registration, but even on Late Registration, there's some of that paranoia about fame starting to creep in, which is why the album ends with a song called Gone, where Ye already has this vision that like things are going to get like really frustrating and I'm going to get sick of this and like bounce. And then on Graduation, what do we see? That fame gets to his head and separates him from Chicago. On 808s, what do we see? Pinocchio Story, like Welcome to Heartbreak, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Like it's just over time, Ye just keeps talking about how fame isn't this thing that I thought it would be, and is incredibly like
lonely.
Yeah. So to have that reflected in the documentary,
yes,
I think, and not just superficially, right? Like Coodie just saying like, you know, Kanye's fame. It's just, we see it, you feel it without anything needing to be said. And you talking about like Kanye's still the same person at his core. And it's like, yeah, there are differences, but it seems like the differences are a consequence. I keep saying consequence. Maybe it's because of the interview with Consequence. But what we're seeing are a lot of like the byproduct of fame creeping in and causing these like impacts just in terms of like the conversations Ye's having, the people he's dealing with, like when he starts having the conversation with the real estate people.
Yeah, right.
And you're just kind of like, yeah, is this who he wants to be spending his time with?
Yeah. I mean, that scene in particular, I feel like that was kind of an eye-opening scene because you see Kanye like wiling out a little bit and going down this like strange path with his talk. Was he like dissing those guys, by the way? I couldn't really tell if he was like just bored by them and what they wanted to accomplish and was kind of going off on them a little bit.
He definitely was like dissing the hotel that they were in.
Yeah.
A little bit. And I don't know if that was like their hotel.
Okay, yeah.
Or if they were like just other real estate developers and Ye was staying there and he's like kind of ranting about the place that they're like he's staying.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was definitely like a little bit of an antagonism there.
Yeah. But that scene, Coodie cuts off the camera. He gets to this point where like he feels like he can't take it anymore. And that to me is like a giant, that's a moment of insight that I think this movie brings to Kanye West that we just don't get. When you see Kanye say he goes on TMZ and like says all the things he says, you think about all of the headlines. You think about the exaggerated moments. You think about the height of everything he did there. But it's really hard to kind of remove yourself and cut the camera off, to stop and think like, who is this person? Like, I don't recognize anymore. Like, who have they become? And more importantly, like, why did they become this way? People don't just, turn into the person Kanye West has turned into. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but like, we all change, and Kanye changed in such a heightened way. You do have to kind of take a step back and think like, how did this happen? And that perspective that we're getting in the movie, again, from Coodie, going from that very intimate home footage to like not really knowing who Kanye West is anymore, not hanging out with him anymore, not being a part of his life. You have to cut off the camera and think like, who is this? And you're able to do that because you're able to look back at that footage. You're able to think about who Kanye West is at his core. And you're able to look at all the things that were important in his life, like his mother, like the people close to him, like Coodie, like the dewy-eyedness you have of fame before fame kicks in. Being able to recognize all that stuff, it's a lesson in humanity. It's a lesson in having empathy for others and understanding. And that is simply something that Kanye doesn't get enough of. This isn't like a giant, like, I'm not here to just defend everything Kanye does and say like, hey, like, just try to understand him. I'm just saying like, it doesn't seem like he gets much of anything, because he's so off the rails sometimes, and he's so over the top, and he's so doing stuff that's unexpected of people, of human beings, that we don't even lend him the courtesy of understanding, but he is just a human. Like, he is the ultimate test of our ability to empathize and understand. And that's another thing the movie does that I think is so incredible.
Well, you think about, in comparison to just like how media portrays Kanye or goes after him, it's like they might not like something that he did like recently with the Instagram post about like Pete, right? Or Kim, like he gets called out, and the lack of empathy really does come into focus in how people are like, oh yeah, this is someone that is dealing with like a lot of stress, a lot of grief. It doesn't excuse some of the actions, but you don't see it as part of the conversation. You just see a lot of like crazy, like unhinged, or people making OJ comparisons, which is like insane as well. And then you have people, I've seen people being like, well, we keep forgiving Kanye, but we don't forgive like Azealia Banks, or putting Kanye in the same conversation as like, oh my God, why am I blanking on the guy? R. Kelly.
Oh, right.
And you're like, what? Like Ye has said some controversial things, or he might not always say things in like the PR perfect way, especially like regarding Pete. Like he's upset at Pete, like calls him ski. Like it's a little childish, but it's not like Azealia being racist towards the guy from One Direction. It's not R. Kelly like doing all the horrific things R. Kelly did.
Right.
And yet you would think by the media headlines, it's on the same level. And I do think that there's one of the big things with the documentary, especially part 3, is that, like you mentioned, having Donda there, having the people in his life that were there in the early days that might not be there in the later days. Fame has an impact. And I think one of the things that's not necessarily discussed when I see people or hear people mention like, Ye doesn't have the day one people around, you also don't know how like fame affects those people as well, and how much those people have changed, or the differences that start to build up over like 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, you think about the people that we all have in our life like now, and think back to 10 years ago. How many friends were you really close to that now you don't talk to at all? And fame didn't get in the way of any of our lives, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's just sometimes like a natural byproduct. But to me, one of the bigger themes is the idea that you don't necessarily like parents and mentors to me are like the big thing I keep coming back to, because it's like you see the impact that Donda had in part 1 and part 2 on Ye and helping him get to the finish line. But you also see that you have these like people that are helping Kanye along the way, like Coodie and Chike. You have these like hip hop OGs that are helping as well, with Jay-Z giving Ye some opportunities. When Dame Dash sees the Through the Wire video, he opens the budget. Like there's still these people that are ahead of you that have to open doors for you or counsel you or give advice. And you consistently see that in parts 1 and part 2, that it's not just Ye blowing through and hurdling every obstacle. It's something where he is putting in the time and effort, but still is getting help from people that like have the keys to the kingdom or just like mentoring and guiding. And in part 3, it seems like he doesn't necessarily have people above him anymore that are helping. And when you're just left on your own like that, when you don't have like your parents, when you don't have mentors, when you're just kind of flying solo in some ways, it's a lot more stressful. It's a lot scarier. How do you know you're making the right decisions on things? All you can really go by is your guts. And it seems like, you know, sometimes Ye goes in a way that his gut's telling him to go, and then goes, oh, you know what?
Yeah.
Maybe that wasn't like the best path. I learned from this. Okay, I improved from this. Let's move on to the next way of going about things. So it seems like there's still a lot of really good intentions. It's just when you no longer have the guidance that you had before, when you're the one that's kind of guiding yourself,
right?
It's easier to get caught up in a lot of like thoughts, in a lot of emotions, in a lot of missteps.
Yeah, man. I just keep thinking about like how the movie visually, conceptually, stylistically conveys everything you're saying. It's so unique for a documentary to have the style this documentary does, which we talked about in the other episodes, how the typical format of documentaries, if you're talking about a social issue or if it's a biography of somebody, there's a lot of talking heads, there's a lot of narration, there's a lot of just like broad strokes, and getting you the information you need to give a well-rounded picture of something. Where, I mean, part 3 in particular of Jeen-Yuhs, it really shifts in a way that makes you really rethink everything. Like I'm thinking about the very beginning of part 3, and it goes through this insane clip reel of everything Kanye's done the 17 years after part 2. Like it was moving to watch. Like I'm always blown away when just someone's style comes together so well, and the way that part is edited together, it's flooring to see everything Kanye West did. Like it's such a great montage because it really does capture the manicness of being Kanye West, of being at the top, like you're talking about, of being alone at the top, of having the whole world looking at you like, oh my God, it just feels so huge. And then to have that giant montage, and then to pull back immediately and bring us to Kanye West and his mom. Like there's this great part at the beginning where it's just Kanye helping his mom with like her philanthropic efforts, and he talks to these kids at the beginning, and he doesn't know he's going to be giving a speech, but then he does, and he gives this unbelievable speech about like being overconfident. Like nope, it's not a bad thing to be overconfident. Like you should be overconfident. And you could see how that drive would inspire someone to keep acting that way in the face of everything, because pretty soon Kanye's mom won't be there. Like we just saw that giant package of everything happens in Kanye's life, and we know Donda isn't there for about 90% of it. So to have this moment in the beginning where Donda's there, and to see Kanye having that really good energy that never actually disappeared, but was just applied in a different way, and like suddenly was cast in a different light because certain people weren't in his life anymore. Like we then start to hurtle forward and go through that highlight reel we saw at the beginning, and having that perspective of like how fast they went by and like how much there is, who then suddenly like being in step with Kanye and like watching incrementally like what's happening to him. it's an incredible way to look at him, because when you think about Kanye, you do think about the giant clip package. You just think of everything all at once. You're like, God, what happened to that guy? But like we're saying, like, he's just a guy like anybody else. Like, all these little things that happen to anybody in the world happen to Kanye. He just happens to be at this heightened level. So it's so difficult to remove yourself and just remember that simple fact.
Yep, that there's a human there.
God forbid.
Yeah. One of the things too that I really love, and gets back to some of the larger themes I was just mentioning, is the segues to Coodie being a dad. Like, you talk about
great.
Like how we have that montage of Ye, and there's this space, right, where Coodie essentially is out of the fold, out of the loop with Ye, and you don't see him around with Ye in 2007, 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. They finally kind of like come back together. Yeah. And yet Coodie shows us like his daughter being born, and you actually see, like, that was wild to me. Like, seeing Ivy go from being born to like a little kid to giving tears. A speech to the camera. Yeah. And then I was just like, because you're seeing Coodie apply what he learned from Donda, right?
Right.
And what he learned from being so close to Ye and like observing Ye's story, where it's him saying, okay, how can I inspire my daughter? Like, how can I be to Ivy what Donda was to Ye? Because as much as this is about like Ye's drive and Ye's like ability, it's also a story of just, you know, motivated children, like, right, with like determination, and how so many people are part of that journey and that story of helping somebody get from where they are to where they want to be.
Right.
And Coodie being aware of that like, yes, Kanye is special, but all of these kids have the opportunity to be special.
Right.
Right. And seeing like Ivy develop and have some of that like confidence and yeah, like energy to her at even such a young age is so inspiring. And then to see like Coodie talk about how his dad inspired him. Oh, how his, right? Like how his dad had a camera, and like that motivated Coodie to pick up the camera, and we see what he's been able to accomplish, right?
Yeah.
Like the career he was able to have just from picking up a camera and following in his dad's footsteps, and kind of taking what his father did to the next level. There's something about like generations and legacy and like how any of us could be living this story thanks to having people in our lives that motivate us and help us along the way. Yeah. It's really inspiring, even though this is like the saddest part of the trilogy.
Yeah.
I also think in a lot of ways it's the most beautiful.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'll just put it out there. Like, I think Genius is one of the flat out best movies I've ever seen. And from a construction standpoint, I do believe that like it is truly transcendent and with the documentary format. And I think it's doing things I've never seen movies do. But just on a more personal level, especially with, I have a kid on the way, like we're a month away at this point. It's getting real. This movie was just hitting a lot of buttons, and a lot of the stuff you're just talking about, that's all part of it. This idea of legacy and generations and how you raise somebody and what you teach somebody, and just how you can look at the world. Like, so much of that, like, yeah, you could have like the little quips. You could talk about, you know, giants looking in the mirror, but none of it really means anything if you don't have the right energy and the right outlook, which I think Donda had, which again is why I'll be reading Raising Kanye all this month. But the empathy, again, it just keeps coming back to empathy. I've never seen a movie so profoundly describe how important empathy is and show why we need to have it for people. Because as I grow older and I see more people in my life just struggling, like there's so much division in this world, and there's so much struggle on these really small, intimate levels. Like everybody is trying as hard as they can to get from day to day. It's bad enough that the world is at war with itself, it seems like all the time, but people are just trying to get past like these little things that they can't seem to get past, overcome these hurdles, these personal hurdles that they've had their whole life, like trying to change into the human being they wish they could be. All that stuff's really hard. Like, holy shit. This, what seems so simple is actually the hardest thing in the world. Like just being yourself and learning to be yourself and finding fulfillment. Like, that's all so tough. And I think Coodie, he reminded me of this anyway. I think that's the ultimate point of the documentary, by looking at himself, by looking at his kid, by thinking about the impact his dad had on him and relating that to like what Donda meant to Kanye. Like, man, people go through shit and it's tough. Even Kanye West struggles. As big as he is, as powerful as he is, like, he's like anybody else. We have to be able to like step back a little and just remember that if you're not lending that empathy to people, like, we need that. Like, everybody needs that. Everybody's struggling. We all need everybody to collectively just kind of like look at us and understand that like we don't always say and do the right things, but like there's good there. Unless there isn't good in you, then you're a different kind of person, I guess. But God, like, this movie just becomes like, it's so intimate and personal, especially if all that stuff about Coodie's family, that it relays that information, that idea of empathy, so well and fluidly and simply that I don't know how you could step away from the documentary with the same view of Kanye West, which leads me to believe that half the reviews written about the movie were written by people who kind of just went in expecting one thing of the documentary, or can't shake how they feel about, like, they miss the point completely if they come away just complaining about Kanye, you know? It's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw you just made that video, what critics got wrong about Jeen-Yuhs. I didn't get to watch it yet, but it seems like...
It's pretty much everything we've been saying.
Yeah, a topic that's very dear to your heart.
Yeah.
In terms of, I mean, as you said earlier, like, the reason we started Film Colossus was just we were so annoyed with
yeah
critics that just don't know how to like talk about things anymore. Watch a movie. Yeah. It's very,
I mean, it is an art to watch a movie, like to be engaged, to be active with the movie, to understand what that's something you really have to invest yourself in. And when you do that, the movie becomes a reflection of yourself, and you can gain insight into yourself. And if you're writing reviews like this, like, you're not doing it. You're not getting the impact a movie should have on you.
Well, yeah, because you can imagine that there's some people that just watch movies for entertainment value, right?
Sure.
They're not watching it for existential reflection or through like a viewpoint of this is helping me understand the world. This is helping me understand people. It's just like, was the acting good? Was I entertained throughout? And that can be helpful at times, because not everybody wants to have like wants to worry about the human condition when they're watching a movie, right?
Yeah, right.
They do just want entertainment. They do just want fun. But when the entire industry just seems geared towards the one-dimensional aspect of like good or bad, and whatever like personal judgments a critic is making on it, it's just so short-sighted. It's like when we were doing film festival coverage, the rule that we had was that because these film festival films, like, they're not big budget things, right? You have people really trying their best. Well, I mean, some of the film festival films were, but when we're going to like Slam Dance or seeing some of the stuff that's not in competition, but just like, you know, it's a first-time filmmaker that got their film into Sundance.
Right.
Like, our perspective was, we're not writing about whether the movie is good or bad. We're writing about what people can take away from this. That's like the reason to watch it. Right? What's the thing that you're getting from it? And it just seemed, as you're saying, like a lot of critics miss that idea of like, what do I take away from this experience?
Yeah.
Where they're just looking at it like, oh, there's a change in tone, and I don't think I like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just tough with Kanye, because it almost seems like nobody could talk about Kanye or just like the details of his music or ideas, because you just want to talk about Kanye and you don't like this or that thing Kanye did. So why would you ever lend that kind of person any sort of insight? But that does make me think, I don't know what the exact line is, but there's this great moment in the movie where Coodie is like, where Kanye, after his mom dies, they were like, well, don't you want to take some time off? And he says, like, if my mom was here, she would tell me to get on that stage and kill it, dog. Yeah. And it's a great moment because, like, it's great because Donda's spirit lives on in Kanye in that way, and he still is driven. But with that, Coodie adds something, and again, I don't remember the exact line, but he basically says, like, why would Kanye ever trust anybody who treats him worse than Donda? And to me, that was an incredible realization that Kanye, you know, he has that quote, get on stage, kill it, dog. Like, yeah, of course he's going to have that energy. In fact, that confidence that Donda gave him amplified by like 20 when she died, probably. Because suddenly he's carrying on what he does for her, like from beyond the grave. Like he's honoring her legacy. He's never going to give up, and he's never going to trust anybody who treats him like dog shit because Donda did it. Like Donda listened to him. Donda gave him advice. Like Donda saw that overconfidence isn't a bad thing. You just have to learn how to channel it. Like when you give somebody that kind of advice and empathy and recognize their humanity, like that's so key and crucial. Like why would you even bother with people who are just, you know, writing clickbaity headlines and trying to get you villainized? Like it all starts to make sense.
Well, it's like maybe a weird example, but you think about romantic relationships and how many people who only date like bad people. Like, right. I know, like personally, I had a lot of friends that like dated asshole dudes or dated very controlling, like mean women. Mm-hmm. And you can start to think that that's just like how it is. That if you've never been in a relationship with someone that treats you well and that respects your right. like humanity and respects your intelligence and like listens to you, then if the bar is that low, you're just going to date anyone that like hits that level of right. giving you attention. And you might be distrustful of someone that is like better because you're like, I don't think this is how it's supposed to be. Where if you have a role model or you have a parent that treats you the way that Donda treated Ye, it really does raise your expectations of like how you want people to like who you're going to let into your life, who you're going to let talk to you a certain way because you had someone that was so loving, so compelling. I mean, I'm thinking, I just saw a clip earlier today of Ye in Miami, and it's just some like random person interviewing him. and
it's not us.
Know, it's not us, right? It's like Sasha and Aaron or something. And he's like, why'd you throw the microphone? And Ye says that he didn't throw the microphone because of the sound. It's because he didn't want to do the concert in the first place. And the promoter made him do the concert portion. Oh. And when he was like performing the song, and I guess like when the sound stuff started going on, there was just part of him that was like, I don't want to be doing this right now at all. Why am I doing this? Like, and you're not going to force me to do this.
Yeah.
And that's why he threw the mic and stopped doing the performance.
Wow.
Yeah. So you're seeing like a bit of that like rebel energy, right? And a bit of that like, all right, they're like trying to force me to do something I don't want to do. They don't have like my consideration in mind, my best interest in mind. It just kind of encapsulates that idea of having someone that cares about you versus having someone that's just telling you what to do because it's best
right.
for business, and how annoying that can be.
Which again, like makes you think of that scene of the realtors. Like Kanye's not ever going to just sit and talk bullshit business jargon, you know? Like to him, there's always an end in sight. I'm just like looking now at some of the quotes I wrote down from the movie. Like, I'm not satisfied with anything less than the best. I won't be satisfied until the world is satisfied. Like you could see how that mentality leads to a presidential run, to somebody who's not going to just do whatever to make money. Like he's always going to have that energy he had from the first two parts. And again, like, that's really inspiring, even if like what comes out isn't always inspiring. Like the intention, the goal, the drive, like that can manifest in anybody, including ourselves. It's just so incredible to see somebody going through those motions.
Which I can imagine somebody being like, wait, he's never going to settle for less than the best, but like, what about like Donda 2 coming out in the way that it came out? Or what about like all of these kind of half finished, or you see that with his school, like they don't even have like the physical location. So how's that? Or his presidential campaign is a good example.
Right.
Like it wasn't necessarily a plan that was executed to the best possible way. But I think this idea of like, I'm not satisfied unless it's the best, is also working in tandem with Ye knowing that it's a process with all of these things. Like you take steps forward, you iterate, you learn, and you keep improving on things. It's like the same thing with him as a producer, right? He wasn't the best producer when he first started producing. He wasn't the best rapper when he first started rapping, but you make things, you put things out there, you learn from it, and you keep going. And he's at a place where he wants to learn in real time, and not just from like individuals or small groups. He wants feedback from the world. And so you see him like doing some like in quotes half-assed things, but that's just because it's part of the process to getting things to the best version that they can be.
Yeah, it's also just like the fearlessness. Again, another thing Donda instilled in him is just always putting yourself out there and like working through things and getting feedback. I that's actually a huge thing we learned from all those interactions with Donda, is like how open to feedback Kanye is and how that has carried into his life. Like, yeah, sure, he it could seem like he's wilding out in a way sometimes that nobody can speak to him and tell him what to do. But he is also somebody who, I mean, thinking about like, maybe this is a bad example because he did go back to using caps lock a lot, but that whole Instagram post about like using caps lock and how it can have, like, I'm learning in real time with the rest of you. Like, he's had a lot of sentiments like that over time that clearly came from Donda, and again, led insight into just how much, like what you're saying, like only being satisfied with the best. Like it doesn't mean like you only put out this one thing. Like it's a slow process to achieving the best, to making the best just like part of your life, and ultimately finding that kind of fulfillment that we're all looking for.
Yeah, very much that. And do you think in some ways, in watching the part 1, part 2, part 3, and especially I think part 3, did it make you rethink about like the album Donda and what it meant and how he was approaching it? Because I felt like I had a better understanding of the idea of like, oh yeah, he's like channeling in having the speech, right? The speech that he has from Donda on the song Donda. It just made me kind of be like, this is what he was getting at. Like this energy, this like compassion, the lessons that she taught him, like trying to bring these things back into his life. And that's where that album title came from.
Yeah. There's specific stuff like that for sure we could get into, but just on a broad level, I feel like everything we're talking about lends insight into Donda, the album. Like Donda is such a central figure in all of these movies, even though she's not really there for part 3. Like the way we see her talking to Kanye, I mean, it's just absolutely flooring to see the way she talks to Kanye. Because again, we see Kanye West, we think about Kanye West. He is so ginormous that how could you ever have a normal conversation with Kanye West, except for the fact that he's actually human, who struggles like anybody else, and has a mom who gives him advice like anybody else. And to those moments, like, man, you really do. We talked about it on the Donda season where like we were listening to the speeches from her and we're like, oh, like Donda has a lot of personality. And I anyway tended to have this vision of Donda of just like nice, quiet mom who like was understanding of Kanye and would set him straight if like he ever did anything like too out of whack. No, she's got a lot of energy. Like she's she's telling him to be the way he's being. Like, she understands like that there's a greater end goal in sight. So to see them together like that, and to see the way she looks at him and talks to him and understands him, like, yeah, it kind of just naturally lends insight into Donda and the way Kanye is.
Yep. I think one of the other things I wanted to point out or discuss is that when Coodie talks early on about wanting to release the doc, if this is 2005, 2006, Ye's response is he doesn't want it to come out at this point because he's playing a character now.
Yes.
And he doesn't want people behind this, like, to see behind the scenes and see who the real him is. And that doesn't necessarily get... Can you hear that?
I didn't hear that.
Okay. That doesn't necessarily get elaborated on. But it is, like, very curious, just given the fact that... thank you.
Is it the dog?
No. It was... it doesn't get elaborated on, but with how much Ye has kind of posted in the last few years about performance artists, especially in 2018, right? He was posting all these books from performance artists and performance art. And he even said in that interview with Sasha, previously referenced, that what he was putting on was like a performance piece, right? Like it's like an installation. It's like a performance art rather than a concert. It just seems like that's still part of his mindset with things, this division between like the performance art, the character that I'm putting forth to the public versus like who I really am. You just wonder at times, like, how much is Ye thinking like, all right, I'm gonna like do this because I know it's going to kind of have this reaction and this is part of like a performance I'm doing or the era, versus like how much is just like what he's actually feeling,
right?
Which I feel, I don't want to speculate too, because I feel like Ye for the most part is like genuine with his emotions. Yeah. So I don't think he's like faking anything for the sake of like dramatics. Like, I don't think him putting on the hat in 2018 was just completely...
That's Kanye.
Yeah, it's him. But I do wonder how much is like kind of next level with like all the Skeet stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Like, is he sitting there going like, I really am like upset at Pete. Like, I am mad at all of this, but I also know this is going to be kind of like a moment in the rollout for this album. So I'm just going to like make it be a moment. And this is part of the performance for the Donda 2 album rollout. The same way him wearing the masks for Donda 1 was part of the performance piece of the Donda 1 rollout.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's tough to, I mean, we don't know Kanye, so it's really tough to pinpoint this, but to me, that's kind of, that was a huge takeaway for me in the documentary. And you're right, they don't candidly address that line of him being a character, but in effect, the movie kind of ends up addressing it, like kind of letting insight into Kanye, the character, and what exactly that means. It's kind of a beautiful stylistic moment when you look at the movie as a whole, because Kanye, he's not afraid to do or say any of the things he does or says. And part of the reason he is that way is he's not satisfied if anything less than the best. And he sees, and he's talked about this a lot in his career, like these elements of control and the way people are supposed to be. Kanye sees that and rejects that and goes beyond that. Like, I say and do things like we're not allowed to do. Like, I want to be an example of somebody who does that. In a way, that becomes that character he's playing. And he becomes this motivation that like you can push yourself beyond the boundaries of like what's expected. Like, you can do more. And that means he will say and do things, even if it's going to vilify him, even if it's not necessarily the right thing to do. The fact that he did it is kind of the empowering part. It's the part that makes us reflect and think. And so this character he's playing, like, he's just not afraid to play it because he knows it is a character in a way. Like, he is ultimately in this giant movie that we're watching, where we watch what can happen to a person and we can look at all the decisions he makes and reflect it back on ourselves, which, again, this is what you and I do with movies. Like, this is the way we look at movies. This is the way we look at characters. Kanye's living that out. Like, he wants to be that person. So he's this character in a movie, but now he's actually in a movie. It all kind of comes full circle in a way that I don't know if the movie necessarily has that intention, but like, if you think of Kanye that way, and if he really does think of himself as a character, like, that all kind of makes sense. And now we're finally able to actually watch that movie and put it into this condensed format, as condensed as 4.5 hours is. And like, it's something we have now. It's something we can look at, sit down, watch, process, and then like think about Kanye, like think about humanity and think about ourselves. It's all I'm doing is sitting here like praising Coodie, but like the fact that Coodie and Chike pulled this off, like all of that, it's so amazing.
It really is. I do wonder too how like Ye will respond to part 3.
Yeah.
Like, because part 1 and part 2 are so like purely celebratory. And it's easy, I think, for the subject to just be like, awesome. Like, wow, this was great. Awesome. Yeah, like fantastic, especially with all the positive response. When part 3 does start to get into more of the like intense stuff, right? Like, you have the moment where Ye's kind of ribbing Coodie by calling him Chike over and over. It's like kind of especially painful due to the fact that there's been the distance that's been growing the last couple of years. It just feels like such a that was terrible. Such a painful scene.
Yeah.
And then when you see like the real estate conversation get turned off, when you see him in Wyoming starting to ramp up a little bit, and Coodie cuts the camera again and does kind of the reflection in his room at Wyoming, or cutting the camera, like, is there part of Ye that watches those and goes, I don't see what was wrong with what I was saying? Or is there a part of him that watches that and is like, I get it, like, I get like where he's coming from, where other people are coming from? I feel like that's it's definitely a fork in the road in terms of the subject viewing the contents and what reaction they'll have to that moment.
Yeah, that's true. I kind of, it's awesome that the movie does that though. Like, it would challenge both like Kanye and just anybody else. Like, I'm thinking about the Tucker Carlson moment where Kanye's watching this footage of Tucker Carlson talking about Kanye's presidential rally speech and everything Kanye did and how much of a disaster it was. But Tucker Carlson like lends, I hate to say it, like some pretty good insight into all of it. Like a reasoned perspective that honestly was reminiscent of something Donda probably would have said. Like this kind of like this moment where you step back and actually think about Kanye's words and don't just vilify, but like, is this so bad? Is that so bad? Like, was this maybe the intention of his speech? And it's this moment where we're like, oh, like, I don't like everything that happened with Kanye's presidential rally. And I definitely don't like that he supports Trump. And there are all these things like you could be against, but you have to kind of recognize that like someone you don't like brought a reasonable perspective to the whole thing. And it does make you think about Kanye's presidential rally. Like, is Kanye also Kanye, just like we have to deal with that moment and kind of like struggle with what we believe and feel, like Kanye's going to have to watch those other parts of the documentary and think about struggle with how he feels about it. And the fact that he called Coodie the wrong name, like that is devastating. Like to see, like, that's why people look at you and think you've become a different person, that you don't represent like the everyman anymore because you do stuff like that. Yep. In your heart, you know, you still do, like you still have that old Kanye energy. Like you haven't changed. It's a giant balance that we're trying to achieve with like understanding this person. Even Kanye himself has to come to understand it. So it would be incredible to hear what he thinks about all that.
Yeah. There's just a lot to kind of unpack in that contract. And like, I mean, it's still limited in some ways, right? Like we're seeing Ye in 2017 post-hospitalization, when he's still working through a lot of his feelings about his diagnosis, about what happened in 2016. And then we're seeing him in 2021. And a lot of the recent footage is limited, right? Because it's what Coodie's seeing in these brief periods that he's with Ye, and they're usually at these like heightened periods, right? That 2017 album making, we're talking what, 2020, in the aftermath of everything with South Carolina, with knowing, I think that Ye knew at that point that things with Kim were kind of like starting to break apart. And then you're kind of like, okay, what we see of Ye at that point could give an idea of who he is now compared to where he was, but it's still a small fragment of who he is at this point. Like in that interview with Sasha, keep coming back to this, you can just see kind of how like calm and cool he is, how like reflective. There was also a video of him excited seeing the paparazzi, and like a few of these paparazzi people working together now. He's like, y'all are working together. He's like, turn the camera. I want you to like see each other. And he's like goes up and gives one photographer a hug. There's just like genuine like humanity and excitement, and not in a way of like, oh, this like celebrity is like acting overly friendly with the media in like a manic way. It's just like a genuine personal interaction that Ye's having. So it is interesting to think of like some of the perception that you could get from the end of the documentary, but I don't think that was like Coodie's intention either. It's just like a limitation of the format. And I do think overall, like Coodie could have made it one-dimensional in the idea of like, see, Ye is just like an unstable person at the like this point, but he kept it very, and I think that's what some of the reviews made it out to be. Like at the end, you're just seeing like unstable Ye, and Coodie kept it very humanizing and very understanding of just like, you know, this is someone that is going through things at times, and I care about him still, and he's still like great. This is just when you're seeing Ye talking to his dad, you're just like, yeah, this is a conversation that kids have with fathers. Like my dad was like a pretty low-key military guy who was smart, but also didn't like say much a lot of the time. And if you tried like delving deep with him on a topic, sometimes he'd just be like, okay, that's great. So like Ye talking to his dad, he's like, do you see this? Do you see this? And his dad's just like, yeah. I was like, that's like me and my dad. There was just something still very humanizing, and I really appreciated Coodie capturing this idea that there's still, he didn't make it a like this purely whatchamacallit, like reduced point just to show like contrast and like dramatize how different Ye was. Like he still took a very empathetic approach, which is what you're saying. Like the empathy is so strong in part 3 that it's very refreshing.
It makes me wonder how half of these critics came away with the mentality they had about the movie. Like I don't know how you can come away from this movie. You don't have to come away a fan of Kanye West, but how do you walk away from this and not like recognize what someone needs, like what they need to move forward and become better? Like that scene where Kanye's talking to his dad, and you know, he's talking about the presidential rally speech, and that's like, maybe you should write it down next time. Like a simple piece of advice like that. And then I think even candidly, Kanye says something like, or maybe the dad says, I don't know which one said it, but like, I'll run beside you while you ride your bike, you know, something like that. Or Kanye says, I need you to run beside me while I ride my bike. Like, oh, like beautiful moment. That is immediately juxtaposed with the Tucker Carlson moment. You can see these two parts of Kanye's life, like, and giving him encouragement, and how that's how it works for anybody. Like your parents influence you in one way, and then the world influences you in another way. Like you never know where the insight's going to come from. And to recognize that, and to know that like there's sometimes like uncontrollable forces pushing you in a certain direction. And that it is a little bit it's out of your control yourself sometimes. Like you can't always control like the way you're gonna feel or think about something, but it's especially out of control for everybody else in the world. We can't control the way Kanye West is or feels. We're just kind of watching it. And that's why I think like, that's why all that stuff happens at the end. You get the conversation with the dad, you get the Tucker Carlson moment, and then pretty much soon after that, we cut to the very end where Coodie gives that prayer, and he's talking to God, and everything he's saying in those moments. I'm not a religious person, like I'm not a Christian or anything, but the more and more I am invested in Kanye's art and watching the Genius documentary and just kind of be more aware of the world and people, like I'm getting closer and closer to this idea of God and what it means to me and how it can represent just something greater. It doesn't have to be like a dude in the sky. It's just like your understanding of the world, basically. And I think that's what Coodie really captures at the end. Like Coodie is praying to God, but he's also praying to a greater force, like hoping for something better and knowing that all these things are set in motion for a reason and that ultimately we're going to come to a better end. When you have that mentality and that outlook, like you can look at like someone like Kanye and have a little more understanding and know that like he's pushing towards something good and that there are going to be little roadblocks along the way. And your ability to see those roadblocks and understand them and understand how everybody has to jump over stuff like that, like that's the true difference. Like that's how you reach the next level. And if we can all be like that collectively, I mean, that's how we really make a change. Like if we can all come together and agree that Kanye West is human, like this dude who is so extra and so next level and does so many things we don't like, if we can like look at him and recognize the humanity and see what's good, like that's just a huge step. Like, again, that's something the movie really calls for and accomplishes. It's incredible.
Yeah. What they were able to do with Ye's story, and even the fact that so much of that story is missing in that middle portion, right? But the fact that at least for this period and spanning 21 years as the story does, I think that ultimately it's going to be something that people are coming back to for decades and really like learning from. And you're going to have, I think one of the beautiful things is you're going to have people that are younger than us, right, at this point, that watch this and maybe connect more so with parts 1 and part 2 than part 3. And then they'll grow with the documentary, right? With their like, in their 30s and they're doing something, becoming parents themselves, or like have had some more experiences that are like up and down in their life. They're going to see part 3 and take away from that something that they couldn't get from parts 1 and 2.
Right.
And then people our age, people older, are going to see the full thing and really relish and still feel an inspiration from parts 1 and 2. But part 3 is going to resonate more with the ups and downs all of us had in our lives and thinking about how we want to tackle things moving forward. It's just, it's the documentary of life, right?
Oh,
it
that's
just
what it is.
happens to be Ye's life in this case, but you can extrapolate it to so much more, that it goes beyond just like, that was interesting.
Yeah.
In the way that like the Fyre Fest documentary or the Jordan documentary or Tiger King, where they're entertainment in so many ways and are reflective of things, right? Like there is an existentialism in Fyre Festival and lessons to take away from it, but there's just like such a difference in what like genius is. I mean, it's going for something bigger. It's candidly like it ends with a prayer to God. Like it's screaming at you that like, God, just like try to understand him a little bit better. Like you don't have to like him you don't have to condone what he does to understand what he does, Well, not just him, like understand yourself, understand others, like the extrapolation that comes into this, like the everyman journey that you get from it being about a journey that is not every man's journey, like is very fascinating. And then ending as it does with Donda coming back in and saying the giant in the mirror speech again.
Wow.
It's such a powerful full circle moment. It's just one of those little touches where you're like, yes, 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 yes.
That's what they're doing.
This is how you end. Like, this is how you like wrap up this. Like, perfect.
Yeah. Wow. An achievement. That would be my poll quote if I were a film critic at LA Times or something.
It's just like an achievement. Travis Bean.
A monumental cinematic achievement.
Would you be credited as Forbes, Film Colossus, or Watching the Throne? I wonder.
All three.
Yeah, they just have it down at the bottom, all three in there.
My byline is longer than the quote they're going to use for me.
It's just like, you can't use the quote unless you use all three places. And they're like, well, we don't have to use the quote. Like, well,
I would get 3 different quotes pulled out for each of the outlets I'm in and make sure they get plastered on the cover of the DVD.
Perfect. I can't wait for that to happen. I do wonder if there'll be a physical release. Probably not, since it's a Netflix thing.
It's Netflix, yeah.
I feel like if there was ever something to give a physical release, it would be something like this where fans would like...
Yeah. Nah, we'll see. I mean, Netflix has yet to release things on like 4K, which seems crazy. Like, you can't get like 6 Underground on 4K, you know, like something like super colorful and incredible. Like, no, just on Netflix.
You can stream it in 4K though, Travis.
You can stream it in 4K, but it's not the same.
Yeah, it's not the same. It's not the same.
But you should watch it anyway.
No, you shouldn't.
Your plight against Michael Bay continues.
It's not even against Michael Bay. It's just like that movie.
That's so funny because it's my favorite Michael Bay movie.
I know. So everybody, this is a preview of our forthcoming movie podcast.
Yeah, we need to do that because when I have a kid, doing the Kanye stuff is going to be difficult. But I can just talk about movies all day.
Yeah, we could just do like a quick. I don't want to spoil the name yet. I mean, we've said the name in previous, but like,
did we? God,
yeah,
I don't remember
we'll
the name. Oh, wait. Oh, that. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was thinking of like the debate thing. I thought maybe that had a different name.
Oh, no. Just like, you know, our 10 minutes
yeah.
discussions
Our
about
snack
movies.
size episodes.
Yes. Okay. It'll come back soon.
I'll be just like cradling the baby in my arms, swinging it left and right as I scream at you about what's great about 6 Underground.
Yeah. You'll be like, Rockabye Baby, 6 Underground is fantastic. Hush, Chris.
Yeah.
Don't raise your voice. You're leaking through the headphones. And I'm like, Travis, you're the one who's yelling at me.
My kid's first word will be Michael Bay.
I hope so, for your sake. Would you rather the little tyke say Michael Bay first or Vin Diesel or family?
I like that Kanye West isn't one of the options either. They're all one of the same to me, so any of them would be fine.
Okay. Yay would also, that's maybe the easiest.
Yeah.
Just
I'll get my kid to say yay for sure. That's definitely going to be number one. Okay, if I did that and I captured it on camera, Kanye would have to come on the show.
I was going to say, like, videotape that, post that, like, see what happens.
If I can somehow get my kid to just say Kanye West, so like that's the only thing my kid can say, and then it's a bunch of gobbledygook baby gook, you know. But Kanye West comes out full and clear, like, I don't know. I think we'll get it.
And then his response is, "Who's that? My name's Ye."
And I'm like, oh no.
Hoisted on your own petard.
My fatal flaw.
Yep. Well then, that's it.
Yeah, we did it. No more genius talk. Unless we get a part 4.
Maybe one day.
Okay. But until the next episode for whatever we're talking about, stay wavy.
Keep it loopy.